This story served as a reminder to all parents everywhere. Children are always watching, always learning. The example you set today shapes the adults they become tomorrow. The sun was setting over the city of Enugu, casting long shadows over the dusty streets of Amici, where the Nwosu family lived. Their one-bedroom apartment was tucked inside a crowded compound filled with the noise of children playing, women gossiping, and radios blaring news in Igbo and English. Inside their small home, Esther, the mother of the house, was bent over a pot of boiling yam in the corner that served as the kitchen. Her husband, Jonathan, sat on the old, worn sofa, staring at his phone. Their children, Lucy, 13, Kevin, 10, and Mmeso, 7, were playing with a set of plastic bottle caps on the mat spread out in the parlor. It was their only space to play, sleep, and do homework. The apartment was cramped. A faded curtain separated the bedroom from the rest of the space. It wasn't much of a barrier, but it was all they had. At night, the children slept on mats in the parlor, while Jonathan and Esther retired to the bedroom. "Kevin, stop pushing me," Lucy snapped as her younger brother tried to grab one of the bottle caps. "You're not even playing it right," Kevin retorted, shoving her back. "Stop it, both of you." Esther's voice cut through their squabble. "If you break those bottle caps, you'll have nothing to play with. Do you want that?" The children muttered apologies and continued their game. Esther sighed and turned back to her cooking. The strain of raising 3 children in such a small space was wearing on her, but there was little she could do. Jonathan's job as a bus driver barely brought in enough money for food, let alone a bigger apartment. Later that night, after dinner, the children lay on their mats in the parlor. The glow of a rechargeable lantern illuminated their faces as they whispered about their day. "I hate that we don't have our own room," Lucy whispered. "Other kids at school have beds and desks for homework." "It's not that bad," Kevin replied, though he secretly agreed. "At least we have a roof over our heads." Mmeso, the youngest, yawned and hugged her pillow. "I want a bed too," she mumbled sleepily before drifting off. In the bedroom, Esther and Jonathan lay on their mattress, their voices low but audible through the thin curtain. They talked about their struggles, their dreams, and sometimes their frustrations. Occasionally, their conversations would turn to laughter, and other times, to things the children didn't fully understand. Lucy, lying closest to the curtain, often heard these late-night conversations. At first, she ignored them, but as time went on, her curiosity grew. One night, she nudged Kevin awake. "What is it?" he asked groggily. "Shoo," Lucy whispered. "I want to hear what they're saying." She pulled the curtain slightly aside, just enough to peek through. Kevin hesitated but eventually joined her, their eyes wide as they tried to make sense of what they saw. Over the next few weeks, Lucy and Kevin's nighttime curiosity became a habit. They would peek through the curtain whenever their parents thought they were asleep. Their whispered conversations turned into hushed giggles as they tried to imitate the things they didn't fully understand. One evening, while helping Esther in the kitchen, Lucy asked, "Mama, why do you and Papa always laugh so much at night?" Esther froze for a moment, caught off guard by the question. "What kind of question is that?" she asked sharply. "Go and do your homework." Lucy didn't press further, but the seed of curiosity had been planted. One Saturday morning, the children were playing outside when a neighbor, Auntie Ngozi, approached Esther. "Esther, you need to be careful," she began. "Children are like sponges. They see and hear everything." Esther laughed dismissively. "My children are still small, Ngozi. They don't understand anything yet." Ngozi shook her head but said no more. As she walked away, Lucy overheard the conversation and felt a pang of embarrassment. Were they doing something wrong by peeking into their parents' room? That night, as the children settled down to sleep, Lucy whispered to Kevin, "Maybe we should stop. Mama might find out." Kevin shrugged. "What's the big deal? They won't even know." But deep down, both of them felt uneasy. The story ends with Esther and Jonathan laughing softly in their bedroom, unaware that their children were once again peeking through the curtain. The fragile curtain, both literal and metaphorical, was all that stood between the world of adults and the innocent minds of their children. Little did they know, Their actions were setting the stage for a confrontation that would change their family. The compound buzzed with its usual Saturday morning energy. Women washed clothes in buckets, children ran barefoot, and men sat in clusters, discussing football or politics. Inside the Mmeso apartment, Esther swept the floor while Jonathan prepared to leave for work. The children played outside with a few neighborhood kids, their laughter echoing through the compound. "Jonathan," Esther called, her voice edged with frustration. "Can't you fix the curtain properly? It keeps shifting." Jonathan glanced at the loose curtain that barely hung between the bedroom and the parlor. "I'll get to it," he said absent-mindedly, tying his shoelaces. "You've been saying that for weeks," Esther retorted. He sighed, grabbing his bag. "I'll fix it when I have time. Right now I need to go." With that, he left, leaving Esther to shake her head in exasperation. Later that afternoon, while Esther napped in the bedroom, Lucy and Kevin sat in the parlor, flipping through an old, tattered storybook. Mmeso played with her doll, humming a tune. Lucy nudged Kevin. "Do you think Mama and Papa know what we've been doing?" Kevin shrugged. "I don't think so. But it's not a big deal." Lucy hesitated, then leaned closer. "What if we try it?" Kevin stared at her, confused. "Try what?" "You know, what they do at night." Kevin frowned. "Lucy, that's not for us. We're just kids." "But we've already seen it," she argued. "Don't you wonder how it works?" Before Kevin could respond, Mmeso interrupted. "What are you two talking about?" "Nothing," Lucy said quickly, but Mmeso's curiosity was piqued. The next day, while their parents were out, Lucy and Kevin decided to act out what they had seen. They pulled the mat to one side of the parlor and whispered nervously to each other. "Are you sure about this?" Kevin asked. "It's just pretend," Lucy replied, trying to sound confident. As they began their childish imitation, Mmeso walked in and gasped. "What are you doing? Go outside." Lucy snapped, her face flushing with embarrassment. But Mmeso didn't leave. Instead, she stood there, watching in confusion. Just as the situation was escalating, the door creaked open. Auntie Ngozi, the nosy neighbor, walked in, carrying a basket of vegetables she had promised to give Esther. She froze in her tracks, her eyes widening in shock at the scene before her. "What in God's name is going on here?" she exclaimed. Lucy and Kevin scrambled to their feet, their faces pale. Mmeso clutched her doll, unsure whether to cry or run. Ngozi placed the basket on the table and crossed her arms. "Where are your parents?" "They went out," Kevin mumbled, looking at the floor. Ngozi sighed deeply, shaking her head. "I can't believe this. Do you know what you're doing? This is not a game." The children said nothing, too ashamed to meet her gaze. Ngozi guided the children to her apartment, sitting them down on her worn sofa. "You'll stay here until your parents return," she said firmly. Lucy fidgeted nervously. "Auntie, are you going to tell them?" Ngozi's stern expression softened slightly. "What you've done is serious, Lucy. But I need to understand how this happened." Over the next hour, the children hesitantly explained how they had started peeking through the curtain, driven by curiosity. Ngozi listened, her heart heavy with concern. "This isn't your fault," she said finally. "You're just children. But your parents, they should know better." When Esther and Jonathan returned later that evening, they found their apartment empty. Alarmed, they rushed to Ngozi's room, where she sat with the children. "What happened?" Esther demanded, her voice filled with panic. Ngozi gestured for them to sit down. "We need to talk." As she recounted what she had witnessed, Esther and Jonathan's faces shifted from confusion to disbelief, then to shame. Esther's eyes filled with tears, while Jonathan clenched his fists. "How could this happen?" Esther whispered. Ngozi's tone was firm but not accusatory. "You've been careless. Children are not as innocent as you think. They see everything, even when you think they don't." The story ends with Esther and Jonathan sitting in silence, grappling with the weight of their negligence. In the background, Lucy and Kevin sat close together, unsure of what punishment awaited them. Ngozi's final words echoed in their minds. You need to decide what kind of example you want to set for your children. Because whether you like it or not, they're watching. Esther sat on the edge of a stool, her head in her hands. Jonathan leaned back against the wall. His face hardened with disbelief. Lucy and Kevin sat side by side on the floor, their heads bowed, while Mmeso played with her doll, oblivious to the gravity of the situation. Ngozi broke the silence, her voice low but firm. Esther, Jonathan, this is not something you can ignore. Your children are learning things they shouldn't at their age. And it's because of your carelessness. Jonathan straightened, his pride stung. Ngozi, with all due respect, this is our family matter. I don't see why you had to interfere. Ngozi's eyes narrowed. Interfere? Jonathan, if I hadn't walked in when I did, do you know what could have happened? This is beyond a family matter. It's about your children's future. Esther wiped her tears and looked at Ngozi. I don't even know how this started. Lucy, Kevin, is this true? Did you really do what Auntie Ngozi said? Lucy hesitated, then nodded slowly. We're sorry, Mama. We didn't mean to. Kevin added quickly. We didn't think it was bad. We just wanted to try it. Esther's chest tightened, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. Try it. At your age. God, what have I done wrong? Jonathan's voice was sharp. This is why I always say we need to discipline them more. Lucy, Kevin, how could you embarrass us like this? Ngozi held up her hand. Jonathan, stop. This isn't about punishment right now. This is about understanding why it happened. Children imitate what they see and hear. The question you should be asking is why they were exposed to it in the first place. Ngozi's words struck a nerve. Jonathan's frustration boiled over. So now it's my fault. Are you saying we're bad parents? No one is perfect, Ngozi replied calmly. But you've been careless. You live in a one-bedroom apartment with 3 children. What measures have you taken to create privacy? That curtain is not enough. Esther turned to Jonathan, her voice trembling. He's right. I've been telling you to fix the curtain for weeks, but you keep putting it off. Now look at what has happened. Jonathan glared at her. Don't put this all on me, Esther. You're here with them more than I am. Why didn't you notice anything? Ngozi raised her voice, silencing them both. Enough. Blaming each other won't solve this. You need to focus on how to fix it before things get worse. After Ngozi's intervention, the family returned to their apartment. Jonathan sat on the sofa, his head in his hands, while Esther paced back and forth. Lucy, Kevin, and Mmeso sat quietly on their mat, too scared to speak. Finally, Esther sat down in front of them, her face still tear-streaked. Lucy, Kevin, come here. The children hesitated, then moved closer. I want you to tell me the truth, Esther said gently. How long has this been going on? Lucy looked at Kevin, then back at her mother. A few weeks, she admitted. We didn't mean to do anything bad. We were curious. Esther swallowed hard. Curious about what? Lucy glanced at the curtain. About what you and Papa do at night. We heard you talking and laughing, and sometimes we saw things. Esther's heart sank. She glanced at Jonathan, who looked away, guilt etched on his face. Jonathan finally spoke, his voice heavy. We failed you, Lucy, Kevin. We should have been more careful. He stood and walked to the curtain, pulling it aside. This isn't enough to protect you from things you shouldn't see or hear. And that's on us, not you. Esther nodded, her voice trembling. We thought you were too young to understand, but we were wrong. Children see more than we realize. Kevin looked up at his parents, his eyes wide with tears. Are you mad at us? Esther hugged him tightly. No, my son. We're not mad. We're sad because we didn't protect you the way we should have. The next day, Jonathan borrowed tools from a neighbor and spent the afternoon fixing the curtain. He added a second layer of fabric to ensure better privacy. Esther rearranged the furniture, creating a small, makeshift space in the parlor where the children could sleep more comfortably. The couple also sat down with their children to have an honest, age-appropriate conversation about privacy and boundaries. Some things are meant for adults, Esther explained gently. It's not your fault you were curious, but now you know it's not something you should be trying or watching. Ngozi, seeing the effort the family was making, offered additional advice. You may not be able to move to a bigger apartment right now, but small changes can make a big difference. And remember, children learn most from what they see at home. As the sun set that evening, the Nwosu family sat together for dinner, a sense of unity returning to their small home. But the challenges of raising children in a cramped space still loomed over them. Jonathan turned to Esther. We need to start saving for a bigger place. I'll take extra shifts if I have to. Esther nodded. I'll do my part too. We have to give our children a better environment. This story served as a reminder to all parents everywhere. Children are always watching, always learning. The example you set today shapes the adults they become tomorrow. The weeks following the incident were filled with change for the Nwosu family. Their one-bedroom apartment in Amici compound began to feel less like a constraint and more like a work in progress. For the first time in years, Jonathan and Esther worked together as a team to create a better environment for their children, one small step at a time. Jonathan kept his word and made privacy a priority. The loose curtain that had once been their only barrier was replaced with a proper wooden partition. It wasn't fancy, but it was sturdy and effective. Esther rearranged the parlor to give the children more space for their activities, setting up a small reading corner with old textbooks and storybooks borrowed from a nearby library. Ngozi remained a constant presence, offering guidance and support. She helped Esther sew makeshift storage bags to organize the children's toys and clothes, making the cramped space feel less chaotic. You see, Ngozi said one afternoon, patting Esther on the back. It's not about how much space you have but how you use it. Esther smiled. Thank you, Ngozi. You've been a blessing to this family. The family also established new routines. Jonathan started coming home earlier on weekdays, sacrificing some overtime shifts to spend more time with his children. In the evenings he would sit with Lucy and Kevin, helping them with their homework. Papa, why didn't you ever help us like this before? This story served as a reminder to all parents everywhere. Children are always watching, always learning. The example you set today shapes the adults they become tomorrow.